Oh, hell!
Hellnight is a first-person horror game on the PS1. It has interesting graphics, cool gameplay mechanics where you need to flee from a monster that haunts you relentlessly and you can't really defend yourself, something Amnesia would shamelessly steal 15 years later. And what if I told you that this monster even evolves as you progress further into the game? Sounds pretty cool for a game from the 90s, right? Wrong! I mean, correct, it does sound pretty cool, but don't get lured in by these sexy promises. And if you follow the siren's call, you'll get sucked into this toxic relationship where you think you can change her. You can change her someday, but you can't change her. Literally, it's a PS1 game and the game-breaking bugs and constant softlocking will never get patched. And let me tell you, this game is a wild ride. This is mirrored in the intro sequence that plays before you even reach the main menu. This game starts with the most confusing intro sequence I've ever seen. Random images and scenes from the game flash in a weird montage until we reach the part where they introduce characters, which names flicker into Comic Sans, and then there is a text scroll that is supposed to introduce us to the setting of the game, but good luck reading all of it. I don't know who is supposed to follow all that while fucking War and Peace scrolls by with 1,000 miles an hour.
Huh?
But the thing is, it's not even worth telling you what it says because the text is just a brief description of what we are about to see in a cutscene right after we hit new game. So why is this playing every time we boot up the game? As you see, the game already shows us how special it is. But for the next part, you better get ready because it's gonna get a little rough. The actual intro sequence after we hit new game starts with a shot of a research facility. We see a scientist standing before a large test tube which suddenly breaks and whatever is contained jumps out, assimilates the researcher and takes on his form. We jump to a different scene, this time to a crowded public space in Tokyo where we see 3 hooded men whom the game describes as acolytes preaching their cult sermon to the people. They foretell the end of the world if the people don't repent.
Repent! And thou shalt be saved.
Then an unnamed voice passive-aggressively acknowledges the group with a "Again, those guys." But then the acolytes are like, "Okay, bucko, enough is enough. You wanna fucking go? You wanna fucking go?" And then they chase the guy into a subway station where he gets on a train to lose them. It's never clearly established, but let me tell you, this unnamed voice is supposed to be the player character. Finally saved from their pursuers, we begin to ask the real important questions. Why are they kept following me? But then the assimilated researcher from the beginning shows up and just kind of moseys in the middle of the tracks. He gets hit, the whole train derails, and we see the mangled corpse of the researcher changing into something else. Meanwhile, on the crashed train, a schoolgirl named Naomi approaches us as one of the last survivors of this crash. But before the conversation gets anywhere meaningful, the road-killed, now changed researcher bursts open the door after, presumably, killing other survivors. With Naomi by our side, we flee onto the rails and run into the subway tunnel system until we run, of course, into a group of soldiers, which Naomi asks for help. But before the conversation gets anywhere meaningful, the road-killed, now changed researcher, which can now safely be called a monster, I guess, ambushes the soldiers from the shadows. A battle ensues and we flee once again into a nearby maintenance room. And this is where the game begins. We find a crowbar leaning on old machinery and a rusty hatch, which is the only other way out of the room. We stem open the hatch with a crowbar and descend into a dark and ominous looking staircase. But when we go down, a brief animation plays where we go like 5 steps down the stairs. The game pauses and suddenly it asks us to save, which is very alarming. We climb down and reach the underground sewer, and before us is a long tunnel that we can't see the end of. We must be in a sewer or something. My man, didn't you read the location title? It was right there. Whoa! Naomi suddenly appears in front of us and starts talking to us. The game calls her young girl, although we already know from the cutscene that she is called Naomi, but she introduces herself regardless. Naomi was out with friends and was on her way home when all of this happened. We don't introduce ourselves. However, we agree that our main objective is to get out of this place. And then we actually get to play the game. The gameplay consists of 2 parts. Whenever we enter rooms, we basically play a point-and-click adventure with a fixed and predetermined predetermined set of interactables. And then there's the free roaming mode, where we maneuver through maze-like tunnel systems with nothing but a compass on the upper right-hand side to move from one room to another. However, we have a map that gets revealed more and more as we progress through the level. But since the map is static and you walk through twists and turns, the compass is actually a very handy item to have. So to make progress, we need to find items in certain rooms which then unlock gates or progress the story in another way. The game relies on a companion system that is actually quite interesting. We have basically a whole button just to talk to our companion, which is Naomi right now. Whenever we press that, she will give us her insight, remind us of current tasks, or give a little bit of background lore. We can also sprint and look behind us, but I don't know why we would ever need to use that. This is the main gameplay loop. We need to go to a certain place, but you never know where and when the monster appears. When it chases you, you need to run away and either leave the level or go into a room. This will despawn the monster and you can leave the room once again and are then free to go on your merry way until it drops on you again. But this is where the game mechanic shines. Sometimes the monster just drops from the ceiling, sometimes it waits for you around a corner, only giving away the ambush by its loud breathing, and sometimes it terrorizes you with its absence, because you expect it to come out at any moment, but it never does in some levels. And this works perfectly with the low draw distance of the PlayStation 1, because you can only see a limited distance ahead before the world plunges into darkness. This heightens the fear and anxiety when you creep your way forward and the world in front of you slowly reveals itself, only to see the monster sprinting right at you. This whole game loop is actually very cool. At first! After we crawl through a little hole in the rubble of a collapsed tunnel, the game hits us with another of its trademark cutscenes. We are greeted by a little guy named Razzo, and he welcomes us to a place he calls the Tokyo Mesh. Turns out, while fleeing from the monster, we stumbled upon an old tunnel system built by the Imperial Army for the war, but has since been abandoned. Today, the Mesh is a city, inhabited by all kinds of people. Some are outcasts of society, some are criminals that fled here, and some are just living here for fun. It's actually a welcoming sight after barely escaping from the grasp of the monster, and we finally find some time to take a breather. A massive explosion rocks the entire complex, and the population of the Mesh is in an uproar. No one knows what's happening or where this explosion came from. Since the underground system was built to accommodate people at war, an automatic defense system was triggered by the explosion. This led to a lockdown of the whole Mesh and us being stranded here on the first floor. After we explore the area, we find the so-called central square, where we can talk to a couple of guys, like Tsunoda, who tells us that he needs important documents and that he was disturbed in his sleep by an old Imperial soldier that was talking about said documents. But he can't quite remember if it was just a dream, because it's a very long time ago that the Imperial Army was here, so it seems unlikely that there are still soldiers here. This is our first quest, if we catch the hint. There's no UI to indicate it, so the only reminder comes from Naomi's occasional comments. However, she also rambles about other things, often wallowing in self-pity. Which, to be fair, is a reasonable reaction of a schoolgirl in a situation like this, and it's not like the player character is shining with any brilliant character traits, or with having a single character trait at all. This man is just a blank slate. Looking around, we find an item appraisal shop, which basically functions as an in-universe item description. Which makes sense, because we come from the surface and many items that we find are foreign to us, and we can't realistically have any knowledge about them. Like this iron card, which is in and of itself a little strange, but it has also a mysterious symbol on it. After we show it to the mole, as he calls himself, he tells us that it is actually the symbol of a cult, the Holy Ring. It's actually the cult from the acolytes that chased us into this nightmare in the first place. And from another Mesh dweller, we get to know that they do this quite often, chasing people into the Mesh. In any case, the iron card also serves an important cause. It gives us access to certain things like this terminal that we can find on every floor. It displays a fully revealed map including important points of interest. This comes in handy if we reach a new floor and don't have our map revealed. But the downside is that there is no fixed place for the terminal room, so it can happen that you explore the whole level, revealing everything on your own map before finding the terminal room. In the far corner we find a few rooms that we can check out. Most of them are empty and so only serve the purpose to be our hidey hole if the monster chases us. But in one of them we get greeted by an old Imperial soldier. He was obviously forgotten here by the army as he still believes they are stationed here. Which is actually a thing that happened in real life, most famously in the case of Hiro Onoda, who was a Japanese soldier stationed in the Philippines during World War II, and he kept fighting his guerrilla-style warfare for 30 years after the war actually had ended. Like Tsunoda predicted, the soldier hands us documents. We can then go back to Tsunoda, who gives us an important item in return for the documents, the mechanized gate key. With this, we can go explore other areas. To find our way around, it is very important that you understand and remember where you are and where you have to go, because the mesh is divided into floors and each floor is split into different areas. For example, the first floor is divided into 4 areas: southwest, where we entered the mesh, northwest, northeast, and southeast. Fortunately, on later floors, the areas are named way more memorable, like livestock or research, this time spelled correctly. The map only shows you the layout of the current area you're in. So when we are told that we need to find this staircase to leave this underground complex, it's safe to assume that it is located in the northwest area. Reaching this staircase, Naomi suddenly has a very bad feeling about going up this particular case of stairs and urges us to look for another way. What, you got some psychic abilities or something? So now we have to decide if we climb the stairs regardless of Naomi's pleas, or if we let this opportunity to go to the surface go to waste. This is actually one of a couple important decisions we have to make during the game, which has a permanent influence on the story and even decides if we see a whole area or not. If we go against Naomi's wishes and climb up the stairs, we are jumped by the monster, which grabs Naomi and bails as we are losing consciousness. I don't know why we are losing consciousness. Maybe, I don't know, we slip on the stairs or something. Turns out, Razo picked us up and dragged us back to where we came from, only that we now don't have a companion anymore. And that's another core mechanic of the game. Companions can die. If you have one and the monster gets to you in a hallway, they are the first to take the hit. Basically, they serve as an extra hit point because after they are gone and you get hit, it's game over. Additionally, depending on what companion you have with you, it will also influence the story and the ending. But for now, we don't want to lose Naomi. So we need to find another way to the surface. Hidden in a corner, we can find— Jesus Christ!
That man at the bar? You know who he is, don't you? Remember those headlines about serial killer running around? It was about 2 years ago, I think.
Jeez, man, what's with you guys popping out of nowhere? Anyway, we find a bar. The music is loud and so is the laughter. Welcome to Little Jamaica. In a corner we see a man dressed in blue noticing us. This is Kamiya. He's another survivor from the crashed subway train, and if we walk into the bar Naomi lives, he can become our companion here.
But there's something you should know about Kamiya before you take him in as a companion. He's a serial killer. And it's not handled as a plot twist or anything. Naomi just straight up recognizes him, just like the guy in front of the bar. Kamiya even completes her sentences and brags about how easy it is to hide from the cops. But despite of his questionable morality, Kamiya has one important advantage towards Naomi as a companion. The man has a Glock. If you press the companion button in the right moment and have someone with a weapon in your party, which is basically anyone other than Naomi, they will unload into the beast and stun him temporarily, which gives you the opportunity to run straight through a choke point that might otherwise be blocked by the monster. But we have a Naomi in our party, and so Kamiya leaves and we can talk to the other people in the bar. Like the owner of the bar, who gives us a bottle of mash brewed booze, which we can trade in for a green card with a lady. This green card gives us access to the control room of the floor we are in and also permanent residency in the US. In this control room, we can deactivate the lockdown that automatically triggered when the explosion happened, giving us access to more areas. This is, unfortunately, something we have to do on every floor, getting a primary colored card and lift the lockdown. With our newfound access to other areas, we now need to make a new decision. On our journey across the first floor, we find a pair of old, damaged headphones in an empty room
room. And we find Mika, who just happens to be in need of such an item because her headphones just broke and she desperately wants to get Swifty in her Fearless era. Mika is kinda bratty and entitled, but she has good connections across the mesh that would make our way to the surface way easier, which lets us skip a whole area. However, there's also Sugiya, who has lost this particular pair of headphones, which has a lot of emotional value to him since they once belonged to his late father. And every time he listens music with them, he thinks of his dad. He will point us at the right direction as a reward, which sounds less enticing. To be fair, we can't really evaluate the rewards when we have to make the decision on who to give the headphones to, because we can't know how it will play out from here. If we give it to the morally correct choice, which is Sugiya in my opinion, we won't be able to skip a whole area. Now you might think, why would you even want to skip an area? The more game the better.
But you don't understand. We are on the precipice of insanity. The game is about to unhinge and dip headfirst into a sea of madness. This is the last remaining level before we spiral into unprecedented derangement. Brace yourself!
We arrive at the second floor, which consists of the residential, livestock, research and factory area, which are all way easier to tell apart than the areas of the previous floor. But with every floor that we descend deeper into the mesh, the attacks of the monster appear more frequently. We learn that there is an elevator way back in a corner of the research area. From this old lady actually, that looks like she's been to a rave or two. She even has a scene name.
Everyone calls me the matron of the mesh.
Now that I think about it, I did notice that her room looked a little bit different from the others.
To get to the research area, we need a special pass that we need to insert in some kind of revolving contraption. And to get that pass, we are told to find a guy named Lino. Lino is looking for two thieves that stole something from him, and if we promise to help him finding them, he gives us access to the research area. Now, the thing is, we need to visit Lino a couple of times, and we need to go from one area to another and back and forth, but at this point, the honeymoon phase of the game wears off and reveals what we have been doing this whole time.
Fetch quest!
I may or may not have made this game look entertaining, but only because I have cut to the main plot points. You know what it feels like to play this game? This is only the way back from Lino's office, a place you need to visit several times. Having fun yet? Oh no, you're gonna sit here with me and watch till the end.
I kind of underestimated the length here. Not gonna lie, I don't have any more gigs prepared, so we might, have to endure this a little bit longer. But there's a door. Come on now.
This section is especially taxing on the fun because the areas are very vast without really adding anything to the game besides padding. Don't get me wrong, coming into a new area is actually quite fun. You can explore it, get a lay of the land, meet people, collect items, but once that is done, you run around in unnecessarily large and weirdly designed levels that frankly just waste your time.
When you play it perfectly. But the rooms and puzzles are set up to make you look around, look for clues, try out different things, which makes running around even more daunting because you already discovered the levels. You've seen these hallways a couple of times now, and once you're in a level, the whole level looks the same.
For example, in the research area is the elevator that we want to use, but we can't get to it because the lockdown is active there. But to get to the control room to deactivate the lockdown, we need to get rid of the ice that keeps us from going up a ramp. To do so, we need to turn a valve to turn off the air conditioning that produces the ice, which we can't do since it's frozen in place. But in one of the rooms is a soldier that fights against the monster. Remember him. We're gonna talk about him. He uses a flamethrower against the monster.
Oh, a flamethrower, you may think. To melt the ice, maybe? Good thinking, but it's fucking wrong!
The real solution is to bonk the valve with the crowbar that we picked up in the beginning of the game to finally turn off the AC. Now we can walk straight up to the control room, but oops, we need a special keycard for that. And we get that keycard from Lino when we find one of the thieves, which is in this box, but he won't come out. So we need to walk to this guy, get a whistle that imitates the roaring of a monster, and play it in the room where he hides. Then he will come out of the box, Lino will show up, he actually comes to us, here in the research area, he comes here and tells us to come to his office, which is way back in another fucking area, for the fucking reward. Then we make our way back to his office, get the card, walk all the way back to the research area and deactivate the lockdown, only to notice that the elevator is broken. Meaning we need to get another item from another guy in another area and walk back to the elevator in the research area. Now, do you understand why skipping an entire area is not only better, but also important for your mental well-being? It's just walking, and the pace is so slow and the levels are so unendingly long and there's just no need for that. Why are the levels so long? I mean, look at this corridor. There's nothing here, nothing to find. It's just long, empty corridor that you need to walk through too many times. And being chased by the monster is the only thing that breaks up the monotony. It's kind of cool at first. It even makes you feel a little bit anxious about anything that hides in the low draw distance of the PS1. But once you figured out how the thing works, it loses its appeal pretty fast and even turns into a fucking nuisance because it's literally prolonging your way when it happens to stand between you and your destination. And it won't take long until you realize that the IQ of the monster is on a room temperature level at best. When it spawns, it does this little raw animation which is supposed to give you time to back up your school bus of a character to run in the opposite direction. Then it runs after you, too fast for the walking pace but too slow to catch up when you run, and when it comes to corners, oh boy, it turns like a fucking tank. But talking of tanks, the soldier that we see fighting with the monster is actually one of the soldiers from the beginning of the game, Leroy Ivanov. He's the commander of a special unit sent out by the government to contain the monster after its escape from the research facility. But he calls it the hybrid, an entity with unknown origin that assimilates other beings to evolve. Unfortunately, his whole squad has been wiped out and he's the only one left, so he wants to revenge his men and kill the beast once and for all. And if we come to this room alone, he can join us as a new companion. Like Kamiya, he can stun the monster with his weapon, which is not the flamethrower he used in the cutscene. I don't know how you came to think of this fabled flamethrower, but it's not a thing. Forget the flamethrower, it's not real. The flamethrower is a lie. To finally make meaningful progress in this game, we need to repair the elevator. And this is where the decision about the headphones come into play. Because if we give it to Mika, she says that we can talk to a guy named Reese, who apparently lives in eternal sympathy to his queen, because as soon as we mention her name in front of him, he gives us the key item, comes and dies. With this item, we can repair the elevator and proceed. But if we gave the headphones to Sugiya, this option is not possible. Instead, we need to find the second thief for Lino, who ever so happens to be in this wardrobe of this girl who hides him. But to get to him, you first need to play the flute, which irritates the girl, and then break open the wardrobe with your crowbar, although the girl doesn't say anything suspicious or drops any hint. When you click on the wardrobe, she just says that it is none of your business looking around in her stuff, which I find a very reasonable reaction to that. But then we start molesting her with our fucked up trombone and she just says we need to stop. But to be honest, I don't know how we are supposed to figure that out. But when we do find the thief, Lino shows up again, takes the thief into custody and says that we are supposed to go to his office for the reward again. And when we do, when we eventually reach his room after a long year journey, after a very troublesome odyssey across the realm, he'll give us the factory pass. In this new area, we then need to find a guy named Tetsuo, which is at the very opposite side of the map. And once we drop that, we help Sugiya. He agrees to repair the elevator for us. We can then return to said elevator and finally go to the surface. The elevator has been tampered with, and we don't find ourselves frolicking on the surface, as we may have hoped, but stranded on the 3rd floor of the mesh. This floor has been built to accommodate high-ranking officers, but it now houses the cult of the Holy Ring. And just on cue, as we make our first few meters into this area, an acolyte of the cult stops us in our tracks. He talks about how they want to sacrifice us to the prince, and how he is now taking us to the ceremony that is being held at the Great Hall. But before we can do all that, he releases an and he receives a karate chop to the neck. At least I assume that is what happens, because right after that the acolyte PNG switches to one of a blonde woman. This is Renée Lorraine, a journalist with special focus on occultism. She wants to find out more about this cult and what they're up to. So in contrast to us, she willingly got into this mess. Or should I say, into this mesh. If we show up on the 3rd floor without a companion, Renée will join us, and I've gotta say, personality-wise, she's a refreshing change from Naomi's constant whining. She's essentially the polar opposite to her. She exudes confidence and even gets cocky and shit-talks enemies for not trying hard enough. Mechanically, she works similarly to the other companions, except Naomi. She has a Uzi that goes rat-tat-tat-tat, which we can see in action shortly after we encounter a now visibly changed monster in another hallway. I think it's actually pretty cool that the monster changes over time. At the beginning it was just a guy, then a mangled guy, then an even stranger guy, and now it forms like this bone plate armor, which is especially noticeable around the shoulders, and it's not even its final form.
But right after the game hints at the fact that it can actually be an enjoyable piece of media, this happens.
In literally just one of the hallways, you find a conveyor belt on the floor that gives you an enjoyable yet very short ride. But then you explore the area behind the conveyor belt, and it turns out there is only a dead end, a gate, and a locked door that requires a keycard that you don't have and nothing else. But if you want to go back, you notice that the conveyor belt now blocks your way. Congratulations! You are officially soft-blocked. You can't escape this never-ending nightmare, no matter how much you struggle. Kind of like life in general. What you are supposed to do, but of course don't know because no one is telling you, is get a keycard first and then go down the silly conveyor belt ride. Why is this thing even here? It's just a random hallway. It's not even going uphill, which would justify a conveyor belt if you needed to constantly transport heavy cargo, but no. One of the cult members that we can meet in this level tells us that he wants out. He doesn't want to be part of this madness anymore. And he warns us that we better stay away from the ceremony, which takes place in the Great Hall, because that's what they want. They want us to come to them. In fact, they destroyed every other way to the surface except one elevator that is located in this very Great Hall. And we already experienced them tampering with the other elevators.
Whatever happens, don't even think about going to the Great Hall, alright?
Oh, you mean the Great Hall that lies just beyond this gigantic gate? This Great Hall? The Great Hall we can access by slotting all of the control room cards into the... By slotting all of this control... By fucking... Okay, I'm supposed to insert these former control room cards into this PC, but it literally won't let me. It requires them to be slotted in a specific order, but if you started wrong, you can't just try out a new one, as it turns out. You need to leave the whole room, come back in, and then try out a new card to start with.
It took me a while to figure out that it would work like that, which, after the conveyor belt scam earlier in the level, and I'm not gonna lie to you, my friends, it left me a little peeved.
But eventually, we managed to get the gate open. What hides behind this forebodingly large gate? What unfathomable horror? What gigantic evil? Well, it's another regular-sized door, slightly offset to the right. This fucking level design kills me, man. Why this large gate? What purpose has this gate for the Imperial Army if behind it is nothing but an empty hallway leading to a tiny door? No wonder a cult of weirdos was formed here. I'm going insane as well. And if you go through the door, we find a train station with ticket barriers and all. What? Who is gonna buy a ticket here? Why are there so many barriers? What flood of humans do you expect to come through this tiny ass door? Let's not think about this too much. We take the train and reach the great... This game, man.
Okay, folks, this is your last chance to bail before we dive headfirst into madness. This game is about to go off the rails. What happens at the ceremony kicks off an incomprehensible marathon of insanity, and it's all foreshadowed by the cult's brilliant decision to place a lit brazier under a low-hanging wooden ceiling. But I've gotta hand it to them. Having an open flame in an unventilated underground complex so close to a combustible material is just a power move. They are fearless. They could be up to anything.
Before us is a huge gate. This is the entry to the great hall. But before we enter, we can find a hole on the side that leads down into an industrial-looking hallway. Reaching the end, we can open a reinforced door next to a warning sign. This is the nuclear reactor that powers this whole complex. It's very old and there are many cracks and leaks, and it's generally a good idea not to linger around for too long. On a plaque we can read that it runs since 1944. But don't worry about it. I mean, it held up until this point, so it surely will hold out for a few decades more, right? Going back to the gate, we notice that we can't open it, but there's a crack on the wall on one of the sides where we can see that the ceremony inside has already started. If I interpret this highly compressed JPEG correctly, that is. We sneak into the ceremony and can inspect a couple of things. One of them is the elevator that brings us to the surface. But before we can do anything, we are blessed with this cutscene. An oddly shaped priest holds a sermon in front of a crowd of cultists. I don't know if this is supposed to be the original Japanese voice lines that they forgot to mute or some occultistic dark language chant, but to be honest, the sound quality and mixing is so bad that it doesn't really matter, can't understand anything anyway. The priest talks about how they already offered people from the surface to their prince so that they may awake their dark messiah. Suddenly, we step on a twig and the whole room knows that we are here. The last sacrifice has just entered the room. Now the cultists walk towards us. But before we are captured by the cultists,
Demons! Elspawn!
René comes in, mows down the cultists, saves our asses and gets play of the game. Suddenly, the earth quakes, and from the ceiling drops the hybrid, now in its final form, swashing some of the cultists aside. And René, the certified badass that she is, immediately opens fire. But this seemed to be the plan of the priest all along, since he promptly pushes a red button which detonates explosive around the room and the floor collapses. I don't know if this was part of the plan as well though. Either way, we fall into the abyss. We wake up to a ghostly-looking Razzo who talks about that he feels sorry for the cultists because they have been manipulated by a certain that which whispers. Apparently, Razzo is not an ordinary human and knows about what is going on here. He welcomes us to the hive and gives us our next objective, reaching the altar, which he claims to be the only way to survive.
If you are starting to feel like you don't know what's going on anymore, first of all, how did you manage to grasp what was happening until now? Because I sure didn't when I was playing the game for the first time. And second of all, don't worry, it will get way weirder. But then everything gets explained.
Suddenly, a battle ensues right in front of us. The hybrid fights against another oddly shaped figure. And this guy doesn't look too unsimilar to the monster. They kamehameha the hybrid and then starts talking to us. They are introduced to us as that which wanders, and they seem friendly towards us. But they also talk in riddles. A certain that which leads already told them about us and that we are different from other humans. If we don't have a companion at this point, that which wanders will join us. And again, they work like any other companion, only that they can laser beam the hybrid instead of using a weapon. Exploring the hive reveals that we have entered a world completely foreign to our own. Gone are the stone walls and metal beams. Now it all feels like we are traversing through the insides of a large fish. I mean, the textures are clearly inspired and sometimes direct depictions of animals like spiders, fish and butterflies. As we travel through the hive, we find a weird but important looking orb and meet some other hive dwellers, but we seem to get along with them pretty well. I mean, we're so tight with the locals that they even call us Prey, which is a very cool nickname. And every time we meet one of them, they tell us what fantastic plans they have with us, like that we will be part of them and that our essence will be the key to something important because it has ripened with fear, what I can only interpret as a compliment. And I don't even know what this guy is doing. And there's even this one guy who wants to feast on our revulsion, and if we let him, he sticks his tongue in our ear and we start to hallucinate that little bugs infest our body with eggs and little maggots crawl out of our skin. I don't know. But that's just a classic that which feeds for you. What a prankster. We have a good time in the hive. We are all friends here. Except this one, I don't know, he's fucked up. And then we find another orb in this cathedral of flesh. I don't even know where to begin with this level. So we touched this thing, which I think needs to be censored, and then we were digitalized and woke up in the cyberspace of a hive where we need to get different levels of clearances to progress. Meanwhile, we can meet digital constructs of previous NPCs that seem to have been murdered, and also we must decompress our companion so that they may not be stored forever on the server of the hive. I told you this would get weird. You had the chance to run, but now we're in this together. But being held captive in this visualization of Reddit also has a good side. We can browse through a library of background information that gives us a clearer picture of what the fuck happened here. A long time ago, a ship full of spacefaring beings aimed to land on Earth, drawn by the planet's abundant psychic energy, their primary sustenance. They feed on emotions like revulsion, hate, and most importantly, fear. However, the ship crash-landed and burrowed deep into the earth, lying dormant for eons. The ship's navigator, whom they call the Prince of Darkness, perished, his essence scattering across the world. The ship is the hive. Still with me? Okay. Later, the Imperial Japanese army built the mesh and accidentally discovered the ship, reactivating the hive. The hive comprises various working units with different roles. Breeding units, worker units like that which wanders, and leading units like that which leads. They realized humans had somehow absorbed their prince's essence. Everyone has a little bit of the Dark Messiah in them, except us. We've got a massive chunk of the monarch in us, apparently. Eager to rebuild their prince, they hatched a plan. One unit, that which whispers, manipulated humans into forming a cult. This cult then lured selected people into the hive's domain, just like what happened to us at the start. They've been slowly rebuilding their messiah, and now only one piece is missing. Us. With all that revealed to us, the formerly calm mood of the cyberspace shifts, and we see that the hybrid entered the realm to make its way to us. But then this banger starts. We make our way to the end of the cyberspace without getting caught by the monster and leave it. From the server admin, whose persona is a caterpillar, we receive another orb and make our way to the coolest level of the game. We are back in the sewers, the very first level of the game, but that shouldn't be possible. We haven't left the hive. Why are we here again? As we traverse through the sewers, we can hear the hybrid lurking somewhere nearby. We hear its heavy breathing, its growling and snarling, but it never shows its ugly head, and some hallways seem to go on forever. In fact, they literally do, because if we look behind us while running forward, we can see that we don't make any progress. And this is the key word here. It seems we are trapped in some kind of cruel mind trick that leads us to believe that we didn't make any progress at all. Firstly, we are back at the beginning, like we didn't make any progress in the game or story. And secondly, we can't make any progress in the level with the never-ending hallways. Additionally, there's the constant torment of the soundscape, which screams of people getting mauled and the everlasting threat of the monster in our vicinity, looming over us like the sword of Damocles, ever threatening but never striking. Well, it is tormenting until you hear the very first well-known stock footage scream and figure out that these sound effects are triggered by walking over certain ground tiles. But the mind games don't stop here. Across the map are different rooms that we can walk into, and depending on what companion you have with you when reaching this level, we see different things. Mostly we encounter important people or situations from the past of our companion, which gives us as the player a lot of insight into our partner. For example, if we have Naomi with us, we learn that she fears being alone ever since a tragic accident where she killed her friends as a little child. It is implied that it happened due to a psychic outburst or something. It's not really elaborated on how it happened, but ever since, people have avoided her whole life, even her mother, which we meet in one of the rooms. She says vile things like that she is afraid of Naomi and that she doesn't want to be associated with her. Naomi is visibly distraught by these encounters, and in one of the last rooms she encounters a version of herself, standing in a field of sunflowers, and offers to relieve her of this feeling of loneliness. Renee, on the other hand, doesn't give a single fuck. She meets her father, who is disappointed in her for leaving the family, and it becomes pretty clear that she comes from former royalty, which is now sacrificing people in the dungeons to summon a devil or some shit. And she is like,
That is all you have. Pathetic.
or we meet her former lover that didn't run away with her when she left the family because he wanted to stay close to said family, and you notice that she genuinely felt betrayed by him. But she's like,
You are a spineless little weasel who can't even shit his own diapers without sniffing the ass of my bitch-ass father.
that's what she says, look it up. Or we meet her colleague who accuses her of sleeping with their boss to get sent to an interesting case, and she's like,
Yeah, at least I'm not some limp-dick little bitch who needs to pay trashy balloon-titted bimbos in a rundown piss stain of a crack den to get laid at all.
It is literally what she said. Maybe she phrased it a little differently, but this is what she meant. This woman is insane. She pulls off the wildest stunts, has no regard for her life or mine, and then flips off anyone who comes along. She is by far the best companion because on the other side you have the whiniest little worms imaginable with Ivanov, who can't get over the loss of his man in the beginning, that witch wonders who feels like he betrays the hive, and of course Naomi, who's pissing and crying since the very first second of the game. And then there is Camilla, who's just straight up crazy. Even the game doesn't want to deal with him. I'm going to spoil this a little bit, but when you reach the end with Camilla, the game straight up shows you credits. No ending cutscene like with literally everyone else, and in fact the whole last part of the game is missing, like the game thinks, oh, you brought Camilla with you? Oh, hell no. I mean, Hellnight. But after you visited every room in this mind trick version of the sewers, you can go into the last room and meet that which whispers. This entity is the one responsible for all of this. They set up this so-called conversion area to break people, to confront them with their greatest fears and thus ripen their essence with fear, which is an extremely normal sentence to say. He gives us another orb and we can progress to the last level of the game. We reach the altar. The level starts off with a long walk. A very long walk. I mean, look at this. It stretches literally from one end of the map to the other. And why? There's nothing there. Nothing happens. I guess they wanted to have this long, foreboding walk to a final showdown, but we had plenty of that already when we just walked to Lino's fucking office. Eventually, we reach the end of this long walk and a cutscene starts to play where we see a completely new abomination simply called Monk, who just gets randomly introduced and is now a thing apparently.
Sorry, I'm still a little riled up from the last level. And I think this bad level design radicalized me. I feel like committing a hate crime.
Monk tells us everything we need to know. That the hive crashed, the prince scattered, and now they want to revive the prince. For that, they need their dark messiah, which is us, the protagonist, John Hellnight. But before we can be sacrificed, Razzo shows up, says that if we want to survive, we need to throw the orbs that we just collected around the hive into the hive's power source, and he promptly teleports us into a different part of the map. And let me tell you, the following task is the final fuck you the developer directed especially towards me. It's actually quite simple. We have to throw the orbs into these glowy fire pillar things. But the first problem is to get there. You spawn on one end of the area and then you try to find the pillar. Turns out, and this might come as a surprise, the way to the pillar is very long. And in true Hellnight level design philosophy, it's just a really long walk with nothing justifying the unnecessary length of this path. But eventually, we reach the pillar, throw in the orb, get to the end of the portal and... get spawned into the beginning of the area again. Hold on, this is not the same area. I mean, the layout might be the same and you still need to walk unnecessarily long, but it's tinted differently, okay? It's completely different. It's another level. Yes, we didn't phone it in. Yeah, turns out we need to throw in all orbs separately and thus walk the walk 4 whole times. And forget about the map, because each course was laid out so that it shows up in the map rotated, throwing you off when you try to work with it. So you better memorize the layout in its entirety, which is actually a tough task because there are no landmarks. And then there is the best part of this whole disaster. There is a scripted encounter for the monster, which you cannot avoid. It is at the far end of the map and you can't outmaneuver the beast because the level has no alternative routes anymore. It's just one way to the goal. Now you might say, just use your companions to stun them. And here comes what feels like a personal insult directly pointed towards me. The developer dancing on the grave of my ancestors. The stun mechanic is bugged. You can shoot the monster the whole game long, everywhere you want, but not here where it counts the most, because you don't have an alternative way to go. And until you figure out what this nonsense is all about, your mental state is in shambles. How do you finish the game then? Use the tactic from the beginning of the game, resetting the monster. This time you need to trigger it and then walk all the way back, essentially turning the 4-time trip into a 5-time odyssey. And for me personally, there was yet another punch in the gut. You know, in my first playthrough, I played with Naomi as my companion, who doesn't have a gun or means to stun the hybrid as the only companion that can't do that. But after the conversion area and after she experienced the trauma of the past, she unlocks her psychic powers from then on out, which can be used to stun the monster, is what I read in a walkthrough long after I finished the game without knowing, because no one told me that she could do that then. Either way, eventually, I figured this whole nonsense out and I was just done with the game. You can see I even used a fast forward function to make the long stretches of this stupid level as short as possible. And after we dunk the last orb into these glowing fire things, it shuts down like the others did, and then several flashes illuminate the screen as we see the hybrid stun animation. A short cutscene shows that the monk is turning to stone, and I think we just need to believe that the rest of the hive is dead as well, because we ain't gonna see any of it anymore. Then Razo shows up again and congratulates us and hurries us into the elevator that is coincidentally located right behind the altar. He says that the hive is going to collapse now that we destroyed its power source. We run as fast as we can, but not before asking Rezo what his deal is. Turns out Rezo is that which leads. He's a part of the hive and he was supposed to learn from the humans. That's why the hive made him look like a human and gave him the freedom to do and think as he pleases so that they may gather information. But this led to him seeing the hive as the evil entity that it was, and thus he wanted to hinder their plans, which ultimately turned into him helping us. With that, he disappears and we run through a corridor to the promised elevator. We get in and the little rusty old lift takes off. We see the reactor room floor collapse and the whole ass reactor falls into the hive, where it causes a nuclear explosion. Luckily, we are in the world's sturdiest elevator and the 4 little steel beams that form the rail of the elevator don't even shake. We reach the top and the doors open to a Windows XP wallpaper. It seems we reached an abandoned military outpost, and as helicopters fly in to take us home, Naomi says that we better not tell anyone what happened, because no one would believe us anyway. And that's Naomi's ending. Now, to get to the other endings, we need to play the whole game again. Shall we? To be fair, I think it's a cool concept for a game of its time to have such replay value, and it's not just the ending that's different. NPCs react differently depending on who you take along with you. Some companions have more knowledge about what goes on than the others, and even Rezo's closing dialogue is different depending on that. Renee's ending is kinda weird though. Cutscene wise, it's the same, but she complains that her footage that she filmed, apparently, is ruined, and that she wonders what happened to the man she was with, by which she means us, I guess. It could be that these are Renee's thoughts after we were rescued and gone home. Then it would make a little more sense. Ivanov deems his mission a success and that the nuclear reactor explosion caused little damage to the mesh. I guess they wanted to keep the door open for a sequel with that ending. That which wonders doesn't even come with us when the hive collapses. They want to go down with the ship and thus the ending is cut rather short. similar to the ending we get when we escape alone. Kamiya's ending, however, is completely different. We don't see any of the elevator cutscene with him. We don't even need to destroy the orbs. As soon as we reach the altar for the first time, a new cutscene plays where the Hive Council wants to make Kamiya the next prince, and he immediately is on board. Doesn't even read the general terms and conditions. He's like, yep, that's what my brand is all about, and the game ends there. And I got to be honest, this is the best possible outcome. The world may be doomed, but at least you don't have to put up with the game's bullshit any longer.
What's my final verdict on this game? Well, I'd say Hellnight is just great. And you know what's also great? This game. It's also a little silly, and it's also a little sexy. So you might want to check it out. See you there.